This is William and Lonsdale, a podcast about the legal ecosystem and the fascinating people who make it tick. Today, your host Michael Green speaks with Sara Kowal, Director of Eleos Justice at Monash Law, an organisation with the mission to restrict and abolish the death penalty in the Asia region. She's also the Vice Chair of the Capital Punishment Justice Project, an NGO working with Eleos Justice and Monash Law to end the death penalty. After completing her arts degree and spending a gap year working abroad, Sara thought social work would be her future career, until some sage advice from a trusted aunt steered her towards the law, and she has never looked back. Sara briefed the likes of Philip Dunn KC and Robert Richter KC during her articles and promptly fell in love with being a criminal solicitor. Now, Sara believes her current role is one of the best positions going in the law. She relishes working with incredible people who share her passion to end the death penalty, be it human rights defenders from around the globe or the impressive students in her anti-death penalty clinic at Monash Law.
One of my former students volunteered with me on a case where an execution warrant had been issued but by a country in Asia, and we had a very strict timeline to try and file an appeal. And she called me and said, "I've looked at this and I was thinking that we should run this constitutional law argument." And it ended up being an argument that the lawyer in this country took on and won. And this guy had a reprieve of his execution warrant, and that was because this student happened to connect the dots and see something that really informed how the team went ahead.
Our guest this morning in Lives in the Law is Sara Kowal. Sara is the Director of Eleos Justice at Monash Law School. Good morning, Sara.
Good morning.
Sara, I think we need to start in the middle of your legal career, not back at the start, because we need to know what is Eleos Justice, where does it sit in the legal world, what's your role? Can you explain all that to us, please?
Yes, I'll jump right in. Eleos Justice, Eleos means mercy, and Eleos Justice is a kind of research and advocacy hub that was started at Monash Law School in 2018. The aim of Eleos Justice is to really focus on research and advocacy to try and limit the use of the death penalty in the Asia-Pacific region. Eleos was a co-parented child between an NGO that I'm also very much a part of called Capital Punishment Justice Project and the Monash Law School. The then Dean of the Law School, Brian Horrigan, partnered with Julian McMahon, the past president of Capital Punishment Justice Project, and together we worked to create this really novel kind of research and advocacy centre focus at Monash. So it's not actually a centre, it's a hub. But since 2018, we've been working both in terms of research and casework and advocacy with law students to try and work on death penalty cases across the Asia-Pacific region to try and advocate really to put an end to the death penalty.
So you research cases in the Asia-Pacific or Asia region where people are facing death penalty. How do these cases come to you?
So when we started Eleos, we started with the anti-death penalty clinic. That was our kind of starting point. We had, in July 2018, we got 12 students to come and we wrote to a number of different anti-death penalty organisations and capital defence lawyers across the Asia-Pacific region that we had contacts with through the NGO, through Capital Punishment Justice Project. And we said, send us some casework or some UN advocacy that we can work on with the students. The idea is very much that the experts on the ground guide us in what's useful. They're the ones who know best, and they're the ones who know, that they've got a huge demand on them, and they're the ones who know how a research place like Monash can actually help and alleviate that work. So some of it involved drafting clemency documents, some of it involved drafting appeal points, reviewing briefs of evidence, very much kind of criminal law procedure work, a lot of comparative legal analysis, so looking at what different jurisdictions were doing in different themes. And then we kind of, also got stuck into some UN advocacy, like looking at how different UN mechanisms can be utilised to highlight all issues around the death penalty.
So lawyers in Asia know of the existence of Eleos Justice at Monash, and when they are working on behalf of somebody who is facing the death penalty, they may think a valuable resource here would be Eleos Justice at Monash in Australia, because they can look into this for us, they can do research for us, they can even prepare a case for us, so to speak, or prepare a brief for us.
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Absolutely. The kind of the point that connects Eleos Justice to these lawyers in Asia has actually been Capital Punishment Justice Project. So that's the NGO. It was formerly known as Reprieve Australia.
Can I just clarify there? And you are currently the vice chairperson of that
Capital Punishment Justice Project.
CPJP?
Yes. Yes, it's a mouthful. I am. And so lawyers in Victoria will recall Reprieve Australia, which was started by Victorian lawyers in 2001, and with a focus on abolition of the death penalty, and really focused on sending lawyers to the US to work on casework, in New Orleans and other states under the guidance of Richard Burke, who himself relocated to Louisiana and is still there. And so for many years we'd sent law students and lawyers to the States to work on the cases, and that was kind of the main work of Reprieve. In 2014 and 15, around the time that Andrew Chanamar and Sukumaran were having the final kind of years of their case, Reprieve was very involved in kind of supporting the legal team that was working on the case, both obviously the legal team on the Australian side that was led by Julian McMahon.
And these are all volunteers here in Australia.
Yeah. And I guess then following that case and the kind of terrible result and feeling across many Australians in terms of how that played out, we really kind of changed our focus to looking at what we could do from an advocacy perspective as an NGO focused on the Asia Pacific region, kind of being really well placed, being based in Australia. And so around that time, Julian became the chair of Capital Punishment Justice Project. We had a bit of a name change, and I've been vice chair for a number of years. In 2020, we let Julian step down, and he's now the chair of our advisory board, and we've been very well led by Stephen Keim, SC, who's a great barrister based in Queensland.
With the complexity of the cases that you are helping your Asian partners with, do you also bring in lawyers, barristers, solicitors to help? Because I'm assuming, I'm going back to my own experience as a student close to 60 years ago, I would have known nothing.
Absolutely. This work couldn't be done without a huge amount of volunteer hours by barristers and solicitors across Australia. We have many who've been so generous with their time and who kind of jump in and help us. And so it's really a collaboration between my students in the Eleos Anti-Death Penalty Clinic, a whole lot of volunteer barristers who kind of volunteer through CPJP, and of course being led by the teams on the ground who tell us what they need and what's useful. There's only one paid employee at CPJP. The rest is all...
Am I looking at her?
No. No.
You're paid by Monash.
I'm paid by Monash. Elizabeth Wood, who's actually a former graduate of the Eleos Anti-Death Penalty Clinic, is our full-time CEO and has been in that role since 2022, but she was part of the pilot clinic of the Eleos Anti-Death Penalty Clinic.
Now, looking at what appears to me to be a very complex structure involving Eleos Justice and CPJP and Monash Law and barristers around Australia, I'm assuming your role is as a coordinator, pulling everyone together.
Yeah, certainly a huge part of what I do is coordination. I also do a lot of the legal work. I'm very much involved in the casework using my experience in criminal law and now my increasingly lengthy experience in working on capital defence cases. So I get to do both. But I guess, the best example I can give you of how this partnership model works is in March 2020 when CPJP was contacted by the family of an Australian who was on death row in Thailand called Luke Cook.
Can I just remind everybody, CPJP is Capital Punishment Justice Program.
Project.
Project. And it's an NGO.
It's an NGO. So because the NGOs had kind of a lot of experience working on these types of cases, they were contacted by the family of Luke Cook, who was an Australian who found himself arrested in Thailand in December 2017 and charged with drug offences, a large importation along with two other people, a Thai resident and an American citizen. And he was convicted at a trial and put on death row, and then he'd also had an appeal that failed, and so his sentence was confirmed. And so when we got involved in the case, it was March 2020, and things didn't look very good for Luke. And we basically formed a team of volunteer lawyers from the Capital Punishment Justice Project side, and I got a team of students from the Eleos Anti-Death Penalty Clinic, and together we kind of poured through the brief of evidence. We poured through, kind of all different angles. We looked at international human rights frameworks, and we thought, how can we help Luke? And we filed what's called an amicus curiae brief to the Thai Supreme Court. And we managed, through CPJP's role on the parliament in terms of engaging with parliamentarians, we managed to get the co-chairs of the Australian Parliamentary Committee for Abolition of the Death Penalty to co-sign our amicus curiae brief. And that got submitted, and Luke and his two co-defendants were both exonerated in September 2021 after about 4 years in jail, mostly on death row.
And Luke is still in jail, I assume?
He's back in Perth. He was
really?
fully exonerated. So in that year, in 2021, there were less than 20 people globally who were exonerated of a death penalty offence, and Luke and his two co-accused were 3 of those. And that was really a result of the students working on the case, doing a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the very kind of pedantic research, and then having the opportunity to work with the lawyers at Capital Punishment Justice Project. And we also had, pro bono law firms helping us with the drafting. We were really fortunate to have that kind of team to work with us. It was a big coordinated effort, and, a barrister here at Vic Bar kind of was also very involved in that. And then we coordinated with parliamentarians, and Senator Dean Smith, who's still in the Senate, and Chris Hayes, who's now retired, member for Fowler, co-signed the brief. So it was this amazing coordinated project, and I guess that's kind of the best way I can describe how the collaboration has worked.
Between Eleos Justice, Capital Punishment Justice Program, and a clinic at Monash, the Death Penalty Clinic, Anti-Death Penalty Clinic.
So
all those pieces come together.
Eleos is part of Monash Law.
Yes.
And in the middle of Eleos's heart is the Anti-Death Penalty Clinic, which I've been running since 2018.
It makes me think, Sara, at any given time, how many cases, files might Eleos be working on?
We have partnerships with about 12 or 13 groups across the Asia-Pacific region, but it fluctuates. So on any given day, I've probably got my head around 5 cases. And on top of that, probably more so is the UN advocacy aspect, helping different NGOs and organisations make submissions to the UN.
Does Monash fund you entirely, or
Yes.
is funding an issue for you?
So Eleos Justice is funded by Monash. Initially, it was that we got a fantastic seed funding from DFAT. So CPJP and Monash Law went to DFAT and said, "Can you please help us start this?" And they did. Monash then matched the funding, and we took off and are still going. So we're very much part of the law faculty. I'm a full-time employee of Monash Law. Quite separately, Capital Punishment Justice Project is an NGO. As I said, it's got its own one employee, and like any NGO, we are always begging for funding. But that's not – Capital Punishment Justice Project is the partner of Monash Law.
I've read somewhere, Sara, you saying that it carries more weight for submissions to be made to governments if they come from an educational institution like Monash as opposed to coming from an NGO like Capital Punishment justice program?
Absolutely. So I guess from Capital Punishment Justice Project's perspective, the whole idea of being able to partner with an academic institution such as Monash was that independent evidence-based research from an academic institution is always going to be much more appropriately and better received by the governments and other advocacy bodies that we feel need to hear the research. And so whereas NGOs can produce their own reports, they're not done through the same rigorous peer review standards that academic research is. So really for CPJP, being able to have this Eleos Justice exist in Eleos Justice, be able to create research, engage in different partners, research-based partnerships and produce strong evidence-based policy and guidance is really effective. So I always kind of focus the research that comes from Eleos Justice comes from academic institution, and then the NGO Capital Punishment Justice Project is well placed to use the findings in its advocacy. But an NGO itself, I think, is better placed amplifying evidence-based research than trying to create its own.
Sara, having this conversation, of course, raises the question in my mind, worldwide, how many people are on death row?
At the end of 2024, the estimate was 28,500 people. That was Amnesty International's estimate.
Do we have any idea how many of those people are statistically likely to be reprieved?
Very small number. The rates of exoneration are very, very small. There's 28,500 people on death row globally. The rate of execution is actually significantly less. In 2024, about 1,500 people globally were executed. That's not including countries that don't give data like China. The risk of being executed whilst on death row is, as I said, relatively small compared to the number of people on death row. But there's all these people living in terrible, terrible death row conditions, living under the idea that their lives could be ended by the state at any time.
Which is a very strong argument for the various bodies that you are a part of.
Exactly. You're
also a part of international bodies, you personally.
Yes.
What are they?
I'm the deputy convener of the Anti-Death Penalty Asia Network. So it's called ADPAN, just to give you another acronym. The Anti-Death Penalty Asia Network was started in 2006. It's a regional network of anti-death penalty activists and NGOs, and we've got about 50 members across 20 countries. It's a great body that kind of really brings together a regional perspective on the death penalty. It shares ideas, it shares resources. It's a really exciting body to be part of.
We'll get to this later in your story, but I should tell the people that you're also the mother of 4 children and, from what I've read, happily married. So it'll be interesting to see how you juggle all those balls. Now, we'll get to that later. You've mentioned many times in our conversation so far the clinics at Monash. I'm an alumnus of Melbourne University and obviously from best part of 60 years ago, and so clinics didn't exist. And I think still Melbourne doesn't have the clinical model. So can you explain the clinical model to us and how it fits into the law school at Monash?
Absolutely. This year is the 50th anniversary of Monash Law's clinical legal education model. So they've been doing it for a long time. They've got kind of Monash Law clinics includes a generalist and a family law legal community centre, and that's been running, as I said, for decades. Law students get to really go into our Monash Law clinics, interview clients, run files, appear in court, and many members of the Victorian Bar have had that experience, that really hands-on practical experience. It's an incredible program. I do teach into that, and being able to see students start by feeling extremely insecure, even though they've done all their study, but suddenly faced with the idea of having to sit across a client and take instructions, is amazing to see them go from that to suddenly, 16 weeks later, writing fantastic letters, going into court, coming and telling me what should happen on the file next. It's really an incredible thing to watch, and I find that kind of engagement a real honour. In 2018, Monash Law clinics expanded into what we call our in-house clinics, and that is where Eleos Anti-Death Penalty Clinic started. So we were the first one. There was another one also called Trade Lab, where they're kind of thematic ideas, thematic clinics, where the students don't go and obviously see a client, because often there's no client to see, or the client's on death row in another country, in the case of my clinic, but they get to work with a supervisor who's got an expertise on that particular theme. So obviously with me, there's the death penalty clinic, we've got climate justice, we've got modern slavery, human rights clinics, we've got tax clinics we've expanded to, co-health, which is a fantastic health justice partnership where they actually do see clients. We've got family law dispute resolution clinics. And so kind of on top of the kind of more traditional community legal centre model, we've got a whole lot of other in-house offerings. So we've probably got, I'd say every year we've got dozens of different clinics on offer. And on top of that, we've also got dozens of externships. So students get to go to maybe the coroner's court or maybe a law firm and actually do an external placement. And that's also part of our offerings. Last I heard, I think there were 700 placements done in the last year.
Am I correct in assuming some of the clinics would be electives and some might be compulsory?
No, it's all electives, but we do provide a clinical legal guarantee where all our law students are guaranteed that they'll get at least one clinical experience as part of their law degree. The same, that doctors aren't let loose in hospitals without some practical experience. The logic here too applies. And I think it's really important. I think the interaction with humans is the secret to letting law graduates out onto the workforce.
Sara, I guess we better go back to the start. This commitment to human rights, does it go back to your childhood? Can you pinpoint something back then to think, or to understand yourself a bit better and understand why you've had this life in the law dedicated to human rights?
It's certainly always been part of my consciousness. And I remembered that before I was 10, I think I must have been 8 or something, I wrote a letter to the government in relation to a death penalty case in Malaysia about Barlow and Chambers. It was obviously in my mind. But I think it comes from being the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors and kind of being born into a world where the idea that a state could make a policy that could end people's lives just seemed abhorrent. And I think that was really just the framework that I was raised in. So it felt very natural to have this view.
You're the grandchild of Holocaust survivors and your parents obviously were therefore the children of Holocaust survivors. Your mum is a well-known public figure in Melbourne, having been an ABC presenter for a long time, Sara Kowal. Your dad an ophthalmologist?
Yes.
So it was a household with an emphasis on education, I assume.
Yeah, it was actually 2 households. My mum is Ramona and she's obviously, a journalist and a writer and kind of very much given me a very kind of worldly upbringing and very big awareness of current affairs and issues. And I guess the human rights focus that I have is very much reflective of her values as well. And my parents divorced when I was 2. That my dad, Lionel, is an ophthalmologist and also very sympathetic and empathetic to the human rights work that I do.
And so it led on from there. Education-wise, you had a normal upbringing in Melbourne, going to a local primary school, going to a secondary school. Nothing particular there?
I went to MLC for high school and I think, they really...
Was that because your sister got a scholarship and maybe you rode on her coattails?
Yes, 100%.
I'm not sure that's true though.
No, she would say that that's true and I'll have to give her that. She led the way and then I too got the MLC education and I think that was a really good place to have some good values of social justice instilled at MLC, and it was also there that I got very into debating and I think advocacy felt like a good place to fall into after that.
But university wasn't initially law?
No, I did an arts degree at Melbourne University, majored in politics, and I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to end up. I had ideas about everything. And, I think it was a really good experience in retrospect to have that 3 years doing my arts degree. I just think I needed that time to kind of think more about who I was and what I wanted to do. After my arts degree, in fact, I did my last semester in Israel. I went and spent a semester at Hebrew University in Jerusalem.
And Melbourne Uni had an exchange program.
Yeah. So I spent kind of 6 months doing politics of terrorism there, and it was a fantastic experience for me. And when I lived in Jerusalem after that, got some work on doing different kind of leadership programs. And in that space, I really thought, you know what, I want to do social work. I want to come back. I want to be a social worker. I want to work with people. I want to help them fix their problems. This was really kind of where my thinking was at. And I actually got an ongoing job offer in Jerusalem, and I called home and I called my dad and I said, guess what? I'm moving to Israel. I'm going to stay here. I've got a job. I was 21, and he said, that is wonderful news. Just come home and make that decision from Melbourne. If you come home and you make that decision from Melbourne, I'll support you, but never make the decision to live somewhere, unless you're back home. So I came back home and I'd applied to enrol in social work or in law. And I thought I'll humour my dad and do a bit of further study before I go back. And then my aunt, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, said to me, don't do social work, Sara, do law. You're going to have a lot more impact on people's lives through law than in social work, because social work has a really high burnout rate. And I think she was worried about that aspect. And so those two kind of voices in my head led me to enrolling at law at La Trobe.
Can I just interrupt and say, looking back as a parent myself, like your dad and like your aunt, two great pieces of advice. Great piece of advice, both, I think.
Yes, I am glad that I came back and did a law degree, so I can see that I needed to hear that. And I think I managed to take parts of what I really wanted to do through social work and incorporate it into my legal practice, which I think it was really something I don't think I appreciated at the time, but I can see now is really what's given me such joy in terms of what I do.
Did you enjoy studying law?
I did. I think because I was a bit older and because I very much kind of knew, as I said, that I wanted to work with people. So I wasn't at all interested in anything corporate law-y, and my marks would reflect that. But the criminal law, family law, those areas were the things I was really into, and I really enjoyed studying, and I enjoyed the people who were teaching.
You come out and you work in criminal law. How did you get a job? It
was really hard to get a job. Articles was the only option, and articles really seemed to me to be people who knew people tended to get jobs. And I was pretty sure I'd be going to Leo Cousins, which was fine, but it also cost money. But I didn't have any kind of networks. And so I was meant to start Leo's in February, and in December of that year, I opened the white pages and looked at every criminal law firm in Victoria and sent in my CV unsolicited. And
Did you get any interviews out of that?
I got a phone call pretty quickly from Susie Cameron, who had her own firm, Cameron Barristers and Solicitors, and she said, come on in. And I came in and she employed me.
Have you ever found out what it was about your CV that prompted her to call you?
You know, that is a really good question because no, I should have. But I mean, I think as now I know about criminal law firms are small. They don't do these big internship, summer round clerkship things. And it's very much a kind of, I think it was the reality. She had a successful criminal law firm and needed to be more than a one-woman show. And so the timing, I think, is probably what got me in the door. And
so you walk in the door, there's Susie Cameron, I'm assuming with only a few support staff. Yeah. What did you do?
It was amazing. Susie had a fantastic practice in criminal law. She'd come from Galbally Rolfe. She'd started her own practice, and right within my first articles year, I was working on drug cases, murder cases. I was briefing Phil Dunn, and we briefed many other fantastic senior counsel, Robert Richter, etc., and getting to do incredible casework. And because this idea that you just let your article clerk go and stand in court and do things, that wasn't the model. It was from the day one. She said to me, Sara, I never want you to sit and not ask me a question. I don't want you to think anything's a stupid question. I want you to ask me everything. And that then gave me permission to really not feel like I had to make things up and also have a real sense of the duty and responsibility. And she taught me really well.
And the people you work, I find it amazing that you instructed Philip Dunn in a murder trial as an article clerk. But working with people like that and Robert Richter, what did you learn from them? Can you look back and think to yourself, well, I can see there's something I learnt there and there's something I learnt there.
Yeah, I think certainly I've learnt to have a strong work ethic, because that's the common ingredient, to really make sure that you know all the evidence, make sure that you do your proper research, that you take the responsibility of acting in the best interest of the client very seriously, and that really means turning up, understanding the evidence and understanding all aspects of your case. From Philip Dunn in particular, I think what's really striking about him is his warmth and his his ability to really relate to all different people. And I think that really kind of taught me about meeting people where they're at, and a real kind of being led by a strong kind of real humanity and respecting the kind of dignity.
And even a person who's charged with the most heinous of crimes, you still meet them where they're at, exactly, as a fellow human being.
Exactly. And similarly, Robert too also certainly has that quality. And they're both, like so many people at the criminal bar, are extremely funny. The dark humour, I think, is something that's an absolute common thread. So sitting in very stressful situations, but being able to have a kind of camaraderie at the bar table on both sides of the bar table also kind of taught me about dignity.
Now, you're speaking about camaraderie at the bar table, and the camaraderie at the bar as a whole is a very common thing and a strong ethos at the bar. Did you ever think of coming to the bar?
No, I was very sure that not being a barrister was my strength. I like being the person sitting opposite the barrister, coming up with ideas, angles, points, and letting the barristers do their magic on their feet. But also I think kind of going back to the kind of idea of getting to work with clients, I really love getting a phone call, one day from the police cells and thinking through, going, if this person answers this record of interview and it's played by a county court jury in 2 years' time, what should they be saying now? And thinking through that strategy and thinking how that will play, and then being able to work with the family, being able to work with the individual, thinking about, what the best approach to their situation is. I really enjoy that relationship. And, some clients I worked with on cases that went for 3 or 4 years. It's a real journey. And I think, the barrister life of coming in and out, I think wouldn't have suited me well.
If that journey finishes with the person being convicted and going to jail, how do you cope with that?
I'm a very realistic person, and I think the aim of criminal defence law isn't necessarily always getting people off. It's actually about understanding what the alleged offending has been and what the client intended to do, and making sure that the outcome actually reflects the reality. And so, also a lot of what we do is organising pleas. As you know, that's definitely, the majority of casework that I've done. So the knowledge that people will go to jail, part of it is preparing people for that and preparing families for that, and getting people's heads around, what they should expect. So, yeah, I think every case has a different ending.
In dealing in this very intimate way with accused people and their families, and maybe in particular with their families, how do you draw a line to sort of protect yourself from emotional harm?
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone who works in criminal law who could look you in the eye and say that they've successfully protected themselves from emotional harm, because you're working in a very trauma-filled space. I think to be an empathetic person and to see people's humanity also means that you do absorb some of their trauma. I think that you get better at it, and that you get better at kind of having boundaries. I think probably having a family of my own helped me, actually, because I was really able to differentiate between my personal life and my work life.
You've used a phrase somewhere, Sara, about being an interpreter between the system maybe and your client.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that as kind of key role as a solicitor, to be able to really interpret this legal system with these kind of really obtuse laws and precedents and principles, and make it user-friendly for the client that you're working with. I think that's really the role of a good solicitor.
William and Lonsdale is brought to you by Green's List, one of the leading multidisciplinary barristers lists in Australia. Green's List believe in promoting conversation around the ideas and issues that shape not only our legal system but our wider community.
Throughout your time as a solicitor, Sara, you started with Susie Cameron, who I believe from what you said, Susie had originally worked for Galbally Rolfe, but then subsequently Galbally Rolfe buy Susie's practice or take over her practice. And so she goes back to working with Bob Galbally and Brian Rolfe, and you work for them as well.
No, so Susie actually went to work in a barrister's list before going to be appointed as a magistrate. So at that point, I went off with all her files to Galbally Rolfe. Yeah, and I got the opportunity to work with Bob Galbally and Brian Rolfe and continue, very much the same type of work with the same, barristers that we'd brief. But, I guess their firm was bigger and I got to kind of work with a larger team.
Around this time, you start a family and you're juggling family and work as well. So there was, I'm assuming, some tension in there.
Yeah, I think the word tension never leaves once you have a work life and once you have kids. In terms of the balance, I've learned that there is no such thing as balance. I mean, yeah, I was for quite a while working at Galbally Rolfe part-time, raising 4 kids. And at some point, I think I just thought, okay, I'm going to need to really have a bit less work and a bit more of a predictable day-to-day life. And so I thought I'll just add in a Masters of Public Policy and go back to doing some study. So I had my first child and then 2 years later I had twins. And so, yeah, after that experience of 3 under 3, I thought, let's do some study. And so at one point I was doing a little bit of part-time work with Galbally Rolfe, a master's, and absolute chaos at home. And then just to ramp it up, our 4th child, Layla, joined us in 2015 and completed the family. So I did manage to kind of slowly chip away at the Masters and finished that in 2018.
And at the same time you were doing work for Galbally Rolfe on a case-by-case basis?
Yes, yeah, they were really good. I think they could see that I was feeling pulled in many directions, but they always made it clear that there was a place for me there if I wanted it. So some of the files that I'd been working on for a long time I kept and would kind of work on those files. And
so you've got 4 young children, you're doing some part-time work as a solicitor, and yet as we learned at the start of this discussion, you are now full-time at Monash with Eleos Justice. How did it happen? What was the journey to get from Galbally Rolfe, 4 young kids, to full-time at Monash running Eleos Justice?
So really the honest answer comes from after I had the twins, I had postnatal depression, which is really common with twins. And I struggled. I struggled in terms of thinking about what I wanted going forward. And it actually was a really good turning point for me because it made me think if I'm going back to work, then I want it to be really meaningful. And with criminal law practice, I feel like I'm working on a case-by-case basis and having impact on this individual and this individual, but I feel like I want something more systemic, which is really what led me to do the Masters of Public Policy. And I guess really led me to get more involved in the NGO work, which is why in 2015 I joined the board of Capital Punishment Justice Project. And I was doing that at the same time that I was doing the Masters. And in my Masters I was learning about development and corruption and all these kind of bigger ideas that really kind of helped me feel like that I wanted to kind of do something that involved a kind of more global focus and had change on a bigger level, which then slowly eased my way out of private practice and I had the opportunity to join the Monash Law Clinic. So I firstly got to supervise.
Can I just stop you there? Mm-hmm. You said the opportunity to join the Monash Law Clinic. Was that just a phone call out of the blue or did you read an advertisement in the paper? Or
It was actually, and I can honestly say this, it was 2 things happening at once. The first thing was that, as I said at the start, Julian McMahon and Brian Horrigan, the former dean, started having meetings about doing a collaboration between Monash Law and CPJP, and I was involved in those conversations, and that's when the kind of starting conversations around starting a clinic focused on death penalty happened. So that was happening in February 2018. And then in March 2018, I was called by someone else at Monash Law Clinics to say, would I be able to fill in and be a supervisor for their generalist law clinic? And that worked for me because I was doing all these kind of bits and pieces. My master's had finished, I had a gap. And so I was interviewed by Jeff Giddings, who's the Associate Dean of Clinical Education, and I started that. So I was supervising Prof Prac which is the name.
Professional practice.
Professional practice, but anyone who's been at Monash Law wouldn't know that that's what it's called. They'd just call it Prof Prac. Yeah, so I was supervising students in there and at the same time having meetings with Brian and Jeff and Julian about how we would do a pilot clinic of the anti-death penalty clinic and start Eleos Justice. And so in 2018, in July, we had the pilot clinic and then we wrote to DFAT and said, look, we're starting, we exist. We are a focal point on death penalty in Asia. We're the only university in the Southern Hemisphere focused on death penalty in our region, and give us some seed funding. And they did. And then it snowballed and we were able to appoint our inaugural academic director, Mai Sato, who joined in 2020. And Eleos Justice grew and bloomed and it went so of course, you know, I've run the death penalty clinic consistently since the anti-death penalty clinic, I should say, since July 2018. But on top of that, we've had research output from Mai Sato and some other academics who've done, you know, fantastic reports and academic articles looking at state-sanctioned killing of sexual minorities, state-sanctioned killing of women, blasphemy and the death penalty, looking at kind of the way public opinion really affects how governments change their death penalty policy. And it's been an amazing kind of snowball.
Certainly has.
Lives in the Law is proudly sponsored by City Maps Illustrated. Their recent publication, The Melbourne Map, is a celebration of our wonderful city. This stunning, hand-drawn illustration, which took more than 3 years to create, is available as an art print, jigsaw puzzle and calendar. The perfect acquisition for your home, office or corporate gifting.
Sara, I'm having a difficulty getting my head around the complexity of your professional life and personal life added in as well. I'm a student at Monash. I decide to be a part of your clinic or take your clinic as an elective. How does it work for me? What do I do? Where do I fit in?
So if you're joining the Eleos Anti-Death Penalty Clinic, then you'll be joining 9 students who'll meet 1 day a week for 12 weeks. You'll be working in teams, normally, 3 teams of 3, and you'll get, you might get a case brief from a country in Asia and you'll need to read it, to analyse it. You'll need to work with the capital defence lawyer on the ground to do the research that they want you to do on that. They might want you to summarise the whole case. They might want you to draft an appeal document. If you're doing something like drafting an appeal document, you'll get to work with a volunteer barrister in Melbourne who'll give you some guidance with that. And you'll get to really feel like you're being part of a team working towards either an individual's freedom or working towards kind of a bigger country advocacy.
Do I need to be a 3rd or 4th year student to be in the anti-death penalty clinic?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming early days, I've got no idea.
We make kind of having done evidence law and criminal law an ideal. So they are later stage students. We've also got LLB students and JD students. It's the kind of one area in the clinical program where those students get to work together. That's not just in my clinic, that's across all the in-house clinics. So it's really good. You get this mix of age ranges and experiences and life contexts between the students. And I mean, I hope they're not listening because I don't want them to use this against me, but the students nowadays tend to be a lot smarter than I am. And so they'll come in and say, I've looked at this and I've thought about this and I was wondering about this angle, and I'll go, yes, of course. And realise that these guys are fantastic at finding information. They're fantastic at analysing it, and they've found some really brilliant comparative examples. One of my former students volunteered with me on a case where an execution warrant had been issued but by a country in Asia, and we had a very strict timeline to try and file an appeal. And she called me and said, I've looked at this and I was thinking that we should run this constitutional law argument. And it ended up being an argument that the lawyer in this country took on and won. And he got this guy had a reprieve of his execution warrant, and that was because this student happened to connect the dots and see something that really informed how the team went ahead.
That is amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Amazing. Now, I'm assuming at the end of my clinical experience, I don't get a pass or a fail or a high distinction or anything.
You get a mark. It's an elective. It's part of your law degree. So you certainly do get assessed. And, there's the frameworks, the rubrics of how we assess all clinical legal education. And that's pretty standard across the whole clinical program.
And do you have to do that? I mean,
I do.
Most teachers hate that part of the teaching experience.
Yes, that it is part of it. It's certainly part of what I need to do.
Sara, you have had the most fantastic life in the law so far, and you are still young, informed by life experiences of the generations before you, which make it even more meaningful. What about the future? Have you thought about the future, or do you only think about today?
I'm so happy in what I'm doing. I really am one of these people who I feel like I've landed in one of the best law jobs that there is. So when I think about, the future, I really hope it's continuing what I'm doing. And honestly, the most incredible part of what I do, in addition to these incredible students, is being able to work with incredible human rights defenders across the globe, all with this kind of similar mission. And I just think, bring it on, there's a lot of work to be done.
Sara, thank you for a most interesting and informative and quite inspiring life in the law this morning.
Thank you.
Show notes from today's episode can be found at greenslist.com.au/podcast. There you'll find links to things we've talked about in this episode, a transcript of the show, and some wonderful photos of our guests. If you're enjoying Lives in the Law, please tell your networks, subscribe, rate and review the show. Your host is former lawyer and Greens List clerk Michael Green. Our show is produced and edited by me, Catherine Green, mixed and mastered by Windmill Audio, and recorded by Alex McFarlane, who also wrote and performed all the music for the series. We're coming to you from the iconic Owen Dixon Chambers on the corner of William and Lonsdale Streets in our beautiful city of Melbourne. We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respect to their elders past and present. There is no doubt that conversations about justice have been taking place on this land for thousands of years, and we are privileged to continue that discussion here today.